So, budget motherboard or high-end motherboard? Let's get right into the video. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nate Push Weights. I do a lot of gaming and tech videos on this channel. Be sure to subscribe and be a part of the family. Today, we're going to talk about a video about pretty much motherboard. Now, motherboards are a very key part in PC gaming and also PCs, of course. Now, if you think about what a motherboard actually is, the motherboard is kind of like the process holder of all your other components, all your other parts in a PC. When you use a motherboard, you think about, in a real life term, let's say a mom and a mom's belly, right? And then you have the baby. The motherboard is kind of like the placeholder. So think about the motherboard as like a mom's belly when she's pregnant to hold, let's say the baby. And, if you think about it in the PC term, the baby would be like the CPU, or the baby would be like the GPU, so to say. The motherboard is like the placeholder to put all those components together and store them in a safe place, so to say. The question is today, should you buy a budget motherboard versus a higher end motherboard? Well, that's all going to depend on, your CPU, of course. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but, if you have a certain CPU, you can't use it on another motherboard if you buy it for one motherboard. And I know it sounds complicated, but the typical person that doesn't really know PC stuff and, this kind of realm of tech, you need a motherboard that is going to fit your CPU. Meaning, I have a motherboard that is LGA L1151, which is basically 8th and 9th gen Intel CPUs. You can use 8th and 9th gen CPUs to basically use this motherboard with that CPU. Now, your CPU, think about that as like the processing, the brain of the whole PC. Like, if you don't have the CPU, you pretty much have nothing in the PC, and that won't work. If you don't have nothing in the PC, if you don't have a CPU in the PC, your PC is just not gonna work. It's not gonna have a brain. And if you don't have a brain, what can you do? Nothing, pretty much. Now, for me, I have 3 motherboards here, and I'm gonna explain each and every one of them. Now, pretty much, I'm gonna start with the budget motherboard. Now, the budget motherboard is the B365MDS3H. That is a long name for this. This motherboard is also an 8th and 9th gen processing CPU motherboard for that chip. Now, Intel, I tend to go with Intel a lot. Now, AMD has their motherboards as well. Strictly today, we're going to be talking about Intel. Now, this motherboard is pretty much the budget motherboard, and I say that because now, when you think about a budget motherboard, think about very few components on that device. Meaning, if I were to have a higher end motherboard, it's going to have all the cooling, it's going to have VRAM, special cooling, it's going to have more, USB ports, it's going to have more audio jack ports, it's going to have pretty much everything that you need in some. A budget motherboard is kind of like, you'll have your ports, you'll have your 2-3 ports, whatever you need, and then you'll have like a VGA slot, or you'll have one HDMI slot, and maybe a little audio jack, and that's it. You're not gonna get the special VRAM cooling as like a typical overclockable high-end motherboard, so to say. You're not gonna get all those tight end specs. You're not gonna get RGB lighting on some of them, on budget motherboards. You're not gonna get that typical design that you would see on a high-end motherboard. Now, taking a look at a higher end motherboard right here, this is the Gigabyte Aorus Z390 Master motherboard. This is also a LGA 1151 board, which is basically 8th and 9th gen CPUs for Intel. That meaning, obviously i9 9900K, i7 8700K, i7 9700K, and so on, pretty much. There's tons of 8th and 9th gen CPUs that you could buy with this build. Now, the difference between this build and a budget build motherboard, pretty much this build is going to have all the RGB that you want, the cool looking motherboard that you want, all the components, meaning, I think you get like 6 or 7 USB slots as well, extra audio jacks as well. You know, the components is out of the world in this one. You know, you get an HDMI, you also get, you know, your Wi-Fi and Ethernet ports and Bluetooth ports. It's unreal. Okay, now the difference between a budget audio motherboard and a high-end audio motherboard. High ends are obviously going to have better audio jacks for you, so you can have a much better experience, so to say. So if you think about it, for a high-end motherboard, you know, SLI is going to be even better. With a budget motherboard, you typically can't use SLI. For instance, the budget motherboard that I have today only has one GPU slot. This has 3 GPU slots. This motherboard has 3 GPU slots. This motherboard only has 1 GPU slot. So obviously you can't SLI with a motherboard that only has 1 GPU slot. So, you know, that's a downfall as well. And basically with most higher end motherboards, you also get a program on your computer that you can install and control the RGB from the motherboard. You can control other aspects of, you know, Bluetooth. You can control pretty much all the audio specs in your build. It's unreal when it comes to higher end motherboards. If I were to tell you if you should, you know, purchase a higher end motherboard rather than a budget motherboard, I'm going to say higher end rather than a budget one, because if you invest yourself into a higher end motherboard and you don't want to upgrade for years on, go with the higher end motherboard. It's going to support what you need depending on, you know, what kind of CPU you have. If you want to overclock, especially, the higher end motherboard is the way to go for support with your CPU. So you don't, you know, potentially harm it, break it, whatever you do, overheat, you know, whatever. With a budget one, you're kind of just trying to get yourself through. You're playing on stock, meaning you're not going to overclock. You're not looking to pretty much up yourself in performance, and you know that can hurt you in the long run, because eventually you're going to have to upgrade your motherboard with your CPU, and that's going to be what, let's say you buy a CPU that's high end, that's like $500, and then you have to buy a motherboard to support that high end CPU. That motherboard needs to be high end as well. And you know, if you don't buy a high-end motherboard at that, you're not really going to live up to the expectations of that CPU. That meaning, yeah, definitely buy a high-end motherboard. Definitely try to invest yourself into a With that being it, yes, buy a high-end motherboard. Buy a motherboard that values itself. Don't cheap out on the motherboard. That budget motherboard that I showed you guys is literally $50. And the other motherboard that I showed you guys is literally $450. So there's a difference there. There's a big difference there. What are you gonna expect yourself to get is up to you, honestly. But that's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think. We do stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/NatePushWeights. We do stream every single day. Come check out our stream. Come say hello. Go follow me. You know, all that good stuff. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We come out with a lot of tech videos and gaming videos all the time. Like button, comment below. And stay beautiful, people. I'll see you guys in the next video.
What the fuck is that?
Bitch, you know you gonna lose. I got one question for you.
Where have your tits gone?
Bitch, this ain't FIFA, you can run. Oh no. But I think I'm about done.
Being nice to you.
Bruh.